Spider-Man No Way Home has a weird final scene story decision that I wanted to resolve. So I've brought in the great minds of Vanessa and Rob. Rob, who's you have your film background, you work in film and you host a podcast, Cadaver Dogs, which talks about film. Not exactly the same genre of film, but
Cadaver Dogs, yeah.
Okay, so here's the question. In the movie, here come spoilers, Peter Parker deals with the consequences of his secret identity being revealed to the world. And specifically, the consequences that this identity being public has on the people he cares about. So he decides that in order to erase people's memory from this specific knowledge that Spider-Man is Peter Parker, he calls on the services of Doctor Strange, who through the mystic arts tries to rewrite reality and mess up with the fabric of existence, which has some negative side effects, namely summoning a bunch of different iterations of Spider-Man from the multiverse into Earth. In the end, this almost causes reality to collapse on itself. So in order to prevent that, Spider-Man makes the ultimate sacrifice and decides to have the identity of Peter Parker completely erased from the collective memory, which means that nobody on Earth would know that not just that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, but that Peter Parker ever existed. That means that Spider-Man's loved ones, specifically MJ, his love interest, Zendaya, will never have known him. So right as Doctor Strange is about to make this happen, Spider-Man goes to Zendaya, they embrace, cry, and Zendaya tells him tearfully, when this is over and I'll have forgotten who you are and what we meant to each other, you'll find me, promise you'll find me and remind me who we were to each other, what we meant to each other. And he promises. Reality, existence is rolled back. And Peter Parker wakes into a new world where nobody knows him, goes out and finds Zendaya, and she works in a coffee shop, has a pretty happy life with friends, having been accepted to MIT. And Peter Parker goes to her, about to hand her a note that he wrote explaining the whole story, and in the last minute chooses not to do that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically the heroic sacrifice that Peter Parker makes. And it drove me crazy because, I already implied my opinion, but I wanted to hear yours. Like, what do you think about that choice? Is it a moral choice to promise before a person is about to lose their memory, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what you want now when you have full control of your mental facilities and what you ask me to do, and then decide in the last moment, no, I know better, I'm not going to do it. Rob.
So you're asking me if I think Peter Parker made the correct moral decision at the end to not tell Mary Jane who he was when he
and who she was as well, like in their relationship.
A decision that Disney perceives as the moral one, right?
Right. Now, do you think this is a moral decision, or if they're just holding back for a sequel? Now, in the Spider-Man, in the Spider-Man universe, Andrew Garfield's character, for instance, he saves MJ as she's falling down at the end, and that's a throwback to the earlier movies that he starred in, where Gwen, who's the other MJ of the Spider-Man comics or whatever, dies in a similar fashion. She falls and he fails to save her. She dies. So I'm wondering, is this a way of creating some sort of tension in a sequel where Spider-Man or Peter Parker has another love interest who's not MJ, and now he has to compete with the two and decide which one he cares for the most? Or that he has to deal with MJ's new love interest or whatnot. I like, from a dramatic standpoint, I understand where they're going for. From a moral standpoint, I think he probably feels like his influence on her life is just dangerous. So this is him looking out for her as like a protector. In an otherwise not very good movie, this is actually one of the points where I think the movie kind of excels. I think it's interesting from a character standpoint for him to hold back, to feel like he's doing danger to her, especially when he just basically killed his aunt because he couldn't get into college, which was a completely adolescent, ridiculous decision to make, when you can really blame the entire movie on Doctor Strange. It's really his fault. He's the adult here, and he should know better than manipulating the entire universe to get a kid into college.
But I think that the moral question comes into, like, what gives Peter the right to make this decision for MJ, right? Like, that's where I think the morality question comes into play, because he is reneging on a promise for supposedly noble reasons, right? Because he thinks he knows what's better for her, and he's made the decision that it is too dangerous for you to know who I am, who we were, and for you to be involved in my life at all. So I'm going to be like the noble one here. But I think for me, the question is it really noble if she has asked to be a participant in this lifestyle, right? She has asked to be a participant in his superpower world, and knowing that, she asked him to bring her back into it, right? She knew what it was like before she met Peter. She knew what it was like after she met Peter, and she was in her full capacity to say, I would rather have met you, and in an alternate universe where I didn't meet you, I want to meet you, right? So I think the fact that he thinks it's noble, I don't actually see it as noble. It's kind of condescending. It's kind of like, I know better than you. I know what's better for you. When she was the one who said, no, for my life, this is what I want. Thanks, please do this. And then he just doesn't.
So I have a question. Maybe Adam, you can answer this along with Vanessa. So do you think that the writers agree with you, Vanessa, and by him removing her autonomy from the situation, they're setting it up for Parker to learn something in the next movie? Like, to continue to grow as a character? That's the way I would look at it from like a filmmaker. You know, I would think that they're purposely putting this flaw into him, that he has progressed from like baseline adolescence to like some form of responsibility. But now he's going to realize that not only do I have responsibility, but the people around me have a responsibility, and I need to respect their responsibility.
If that's what they're going for, I think it's a secondary characteristic. I think the primary purpose of this moment is to show Peter sacrificing himself, which is kind of like the shtick of the Spider-Man movies, and why I liked it a lot as a teen too. Every time that Peter kind of like puts the little knife in his little heart, and he's like, oh, I have to sacrifice myself. It's like, you do feel for him. So I think that's it's part of building his character as a tragic hero. I think that's the primary. And
right. The
other thing, it could be secondary.
Right. Like, the whole narrative of the Spider-Man story is this conflict between the story of a teenager just wanting to live a fun teenager life, getting accepted to the good colleges, and having getting to date a pretty girl, having the basic life of a Queens teenager, being pushed against or tested against his responsibility of being a superhero, and to what extent these can coexist. And the answer is always they can't. And of course, the answer there is, but by the way, this is why I think, as a total just artistic side note, I think this is why this version of Spider-Man, the Marvel movies version of Spider-Man, is actually the best one that was represented on film, aside for the Andrew Garfield. Garfield.
Which ones are you talking? Because
the Tom Holland one. The Tom Holland one, I think, is the good one. Is the successful one? Is
the third generation of Spider-Man.
The third generation of the Spider-Man movies. Yes, the extended universe version. Aside for the Andrew Garfield, Garfunkel. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce names.
So you're ranking Tom Holland best, then Andrew Garfield.
No, Garfield. No, I keep not getting to the end of the sentence. The Garfield one is just bad.
Okay.
By all standards. I think that the original trilogy was really
Tobey Maguire
was problematic, and at times really, really bad, but had some unique Spider-Man-y vibes to it. the Garfield one took itself way too seriously, but the reason that the Tom Holland one kind of works stylistically is because it's always on the line between being a superhero film and a high school drama or a high school comedy, which I think is exactly the tension that you want from a Spider-Man story. So that tension is in the Tom Holland version, the tension between the responsibilities and the dangers of being a superhero and the desire to just have a fun, quirky high school experience is not just in the subtext, it's in the very genre of the way that they made those films. So I think so it's definitely true what you said, Vanessa, that this is what they were going for in their final moral statement, saying that I need to completely separate myself from the teenager pleasures and joys and being in society, basically, and I need to live the heroic loner life as basically just as a Spider-Man. Like, I only get to be Spider-Man now, and that is shown as I think unmistakably as the right choice. There is no room for it to be modified as something that is concerned about or like thinking about it as a secondary concern relative to his promise, which to me just means that I don't think they put it even a second's thought into whether or not he has a responsibility towards her volition in that question. And that's what kind of bothers me. Like, they didn't even wrestle with whether or not there is something a little obnoxious about the self-sacrifice that nobody asked for. Like, maybe like, if you get to choose to self-sacrifice, maybe she wants to self-sacrifice too.
Right.
Maybe she wants to be there with you. Why is it only your job to self-sacrifice? What makes you?
Because with great power comes great responsibility.
Right, but that means that the line of responsibility goes only towards how Spider-Man understands that responsibility, and there's no responsibility towards the people around him in the sense of their volition. Because here's the thing: if the argument was he can't be, and sometimes in some of the films that is the case, that he can't be a good Spider-Man or he can't be a good hero because he constantly thinks about his friends and it makes him make bad choices because he needs to worry about them. So there is a utilitarian concern of his own ability to perform as a superhero being diminished by having people around him that he cares about. That's one argument. And then it just admits, I am not going to take your preferences into consideration because in order to protect the world or to protect Queens, I need to be alone. And that's a fair argument, but that's not what the film is saying.
Well, I think the film is set up to have this problem of Spider-Man becoming Spider-Man and dissociating himself from Peter Parker, because not only has everyone forgotten who Peter Parker is, I would assume that he's going to leave that life by the wayside. In the follow-up, should they do one, which they probably will, Peter Parker is probably not going to go to college. He's not going to know Zendaya and his other friend. And he's also probably going to be infected with that black venom goo, which I think got left behind in the post-credits scene.
Right.
So not only is he going to become Spider-Man and leave Peter Parker behind, he's also going to become Venom at some point in the movie. And through that, he's probably going to realize that he's losing something in himself by leaving his friends behind. And by the end, he will probably reconnect with them and realize that it's not his choice to dictate their responsibilities, like you're saying. So I actually really don't think it's fair to blame the movie on that end. I think those are baked into it, and I think at the end
those are baked into it because they're looking for more story, because that's the final word on the matter. Is that the justification?
Well, each of these movies is made with the following movie like in mind, so they're not a closed circuit. They're all trilogies or quad trilogies or some sort of series of some kind. So it's kind of hard to see any movie as a single entity. And I mean, that's actually kind of a problem with the whole Marvel universe. It's, if you miss one of the movies, you might not know what's going on. Like the following Doctor Strange pulls from this movie. Like,
right.
The problem in it started here, and it also started in some TV show I never watched. So when you start watching the movie, it's kind of complicated to figure out what's going on. As a full movie, you might be right. Like, these are questions that should have maybe been answered. Like, we can close it off. But since there's going to be a sequel, and there's not only going to be a sequel, there's going to be like 4 other spinoffs that have repercussions from, Peter Parker not getting into MIT, which is like the worst plot device.
No, but just to be clear, you're exempting the movie from being examined as proposing a moral question on some version of author theory. You're basically saying that the story doesn't really offer you a closed circuit question, because it's all just like every choice there, including this tragic ending, is basically just a jump ledge to the next movie, and not really setting up anything that deserves to be examined on its own. So even if I take this argument as legitimate, which I'm not sure I do, because I could say that every movie
he could have
does
killed
try to...
MJ and been like, well, definitely won't. It'll be for the good of the world, because if I kill her, then I definitely won't accidentally like bring her back. And then
But or equally, they could have left it in with him, about to decide, kind of like an Inception ending. They could have, he's like right on the moment where he gets to decide whether or not he actually gives her the letter of telling her who he is, and cut to black. Oh, mystery, where is this going? Equally leaving it open-ended and ready for a sequel. The thing is that even if I do accept this argument, again, reluctantly, but let's say, there is something unique about this as a trilogy, in the same way that you can't look at what's the name of the end of the Avengers, Endgame. That was the final movie, right, of the Avengers series.
Endgame was the last one.
There was Infinity Wars and then Endgame. Right.
Infinity War, yeah.
But whatever, even in the name, this movie broadcasts itself as at least being a cap on something. There's no doubt, even in the movie itself, that there's going to be more spin-offs, that it's going to be that the franchise is going to be kept alive on a gazillion respirators. But as a story, it has reached some sort of ending. And from here on, it's going to be the next chapter or whatever. So, but you can look at the Avengers narrative as being complete, and then consider what your thoughts about this and what morals you take from it as a completely closed story, if you choose to ignore the trash that follows, and just look at the trash that preceded. Same with the Spider-Man trilogy. The No Way Home clearly concluded a mini story within the endless, infinite, sickening Marvel extended universe, right?
Right.
It is a unit of its own. So I don't think it's fair to say that it's nothing but a jump board for the next movie. There is something that has been finished and should be addressed, and the tone that they decided to finish the current Tom Holland Spider-Man story is like the classic Spider-Man tone of I can't be with people. Although again, compare it to the Tobey Maguire one. And with Tobey Maguire, he decides, no, I actually do need to have people, and I just need to find some sort of way to balance their needs and their safety with the heroic needs. That those do reach an equilibrium. So their decision was to give him the stoic martyr, loner, moral badge.
Okay. Well, I hear what you're saying. And I think as a closed story, it does feel like it's lacking. So if this is the end, then I think you guys have a point that right now, Spider-Man has taken the autonomy of MJ and the rest of his friends. And through his own fault, he's altered their existence in a way that is out of their control. And in that way, you could say he is morally fallible, but also he is preventing them from dying potentially. So it is a gray area moral question. Is this is the second in the Tom Holland Spider-Man movies, or is it the third?
I have no idea.
I'm guessing it's the second, I think. So I think there's going to be a trilogy. And for me, I would assume that's going to follow the same story beats as the Tobey Maguire. So he's probably going to take it too far as Spider-Man and then roll it back and realize he has to find some sort of balance between himself and Spider-Man. But as a character, he has learned to at least take responsibility for himself. So that's kind of the closure we get with him. Whether or not he takes too much responsibility, I think would be the problem here.
Well, I think Rob's point here is that he doesn't necessarily agree that the film is framing the final decision as the noble thing to do. I think Rob is interpreting that final scene as actually a tragic mistake that will then be rectified. And so in his mind, that it isn't framed as noble, it is framed as the kind of the clue that shows that, oh, later on we're going to rectify this mistake.
How are you seeing that? Where in the language of the film, aside from knowing that there's going to be a sequel, are you seeing that as being presented as in any way ambivalent?
The shots, in terms of the acting, in terms of like what is it? What are the
music? Nothing in the film language tells you that there is any ambivalence about how heroic and good on you, martyr Peter, for doing that.
Right. So going back from memory, like there is this kind of idyllic music and noble score going on at the end as he decides to not give the letter to his friends. And you can tell that the character views himself, and all the film language tells you that this is the noble thing to do. But we can't view this movie in a vacuum because it's part of this universe. So, and it's not only is it a part of a universe as an ongoing story of Spider-Man, it's part of a universe with like 50 characters. So we kind of know that it's in the midst of the series. So whatever happens, it's not the end cap of a character. Whereas like Endgame, for instance, Tony Stark dies. So that's the end of his character. And, Captain America turns into Joe Biden, one of those. So like those characters have ended. So they get their stories tied off with a neat little bow. Anyone else is an ongoing story. So we can't kind of view it as an ending.
I'm still not swayed by you, but I will posit a small, branch here, olive branch, in that technically Peter did not promise a timeline on when he was going to tell MJ. So maybe he just, theoretically, Adam, within our moral conception, if we think that it's morally wrong to not tell MJ when she specifically asked to be told, he could be kind of bending the morality of the act by saying like, I'll wait until she finishes MIT or something like that. I'll let her at least get that experience. I'll gift her that before. I mean, I don't think this is actually what the movie's saying. I don't think that's what he's thinking, but we could, in my conception of like the morality of this decision, like maybe that's a small little leeway we could give him, and by extension Rob, with this timeline.
Yeah. And I think at the reality of the series, given they make the next one, that's what's going to happen.
I don't think she's going to finish MIT. I don't think she's going to finish MIT. She'll be brought right back in as soon as the next movie opens, right?
Oh yeah. I mean,
they
so often retcon these things. At the end of the previous movie, Mysterio tells everyone who Tom Holland is, that he's Spider-Man. And within the first 3 minutes of this movie, the legal battle is rectified. Daredevil shows up and he's like, I'm a super blind lawyer. It is finished. But then he has to deal with the public image.
The most disappointing thing about this film for me is that it didn't take what it set up seriously with a Mysterio death and with the Alex Jones, Jonah Jameson narrative. I thought they just kind of relegated it to a fun subplot where it could have been such more interesting. Also, resolving that drama within the contained world that they created, rather than adding all the Spider-Mans from all the versions, would have been so much more interesting. So that's a disappointment on the creative side with this movie. But I'm still not convinced, because you have to ignore the self-contained trilogy as a story in order to make your argument, and I just don't find that persuasive, even if I concede your basic lens that you're looking at through. Rob, last thoughts?
Well, I mean, other than my coworker David totally agrees with you that other that other plot line would have been much better than the way they took this movie. No, I think it's fair. We can disagree on this point. I mean,
But you
I
think
think we
you think
all
he did the right
agree.
thing?
I think we all agree that he probably isn't doing the right thing. But but from the same standpoint, like, is it fair to base your relationship with a girl on some very dangerous profession that you have? And maybe, you know, you can look at that and be like, I don't have the right to put her in these dangerous situations.
I mean, again, not your call.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, well, maybe. I mean,
first of all, him approaching her doesn't guarantee that she is gonna still love him.
Yeah.
Right. Like just him telling her, you know, you used to really love me. We were closest friends and then lovers. Doesn't probably. I mean, that's what I was expecting to happen. That she's gonna be freaked out and say, "Get the fuck out of here." You're not gonna just recreate all the emotional attachment that they had because he tells her they had it. And I would have been totally happy with it. And I think, if anything, Disney probably copped out of dealing with that question by turning him into the martyr.
So it's that Rick and Morty plot line where he has that girlfriend, and then he goes back in time. He's all freaked out, and he goes to talk to her, and she rejects him. Yeah, but we have to remember that a monogamous
goes through a lifetime of experiences together, and then he goes back in time, and she doesn't know him.
Yes, yeah. And not only that, he freaks her out so much she pepper sprays him and is like totally freaked out by this guy. So we have to remember that a monogamous relationship with two parties is two people are part of the equation. So he needs to decide equally that he wants to continue this thing. So if he decides on his own that he doesn't want to, then he could perceive it as being selfish, as in just telling her, setting her up for the fall. Like, hey, you used to love me. Now I've convinced you used to love me. Never mind. I don't want to continue this for whatever my reasons are. So you could call it cowardice, and that's why he didn't go through with it. And
you're saying the problem is a two-party system.
Yeah. If one party just cops out, but yeah, I think you guys are kind of right. I think it is not our typical good and bad, black and white, the correct moral decision.
Okay.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Rob. Enjoy cadaver, the dead things, the dogs of the dead things.
Yeah. Cadaver Dogs podcast, where we cover the thematic elements of horror movies. We usually take two different horror movies from different decades. And you'll notice our theme song was done by a very talented Adam.
If we find him, I'll let you know.